a great day to record this because they're cutting down the trees on my street. The audio quality is going to be excellent. Hey Minderoo, I'm Chloe. I'm one of the artists from the 2023-2024 Artist Fund. And you guys gave me $25,000 to make sculptures, and I turned that $25,000 into bioplastic that has fundamentally changed my career. For those of you who read my original project application, it would have sounded a little bit like this, which is artist Chloe Flockart wants to create a series of sculptures made out of farm waste based on species that are extinct or endangered from the eucalyptus woodland, which is an endangered biosphere that you would find out in the central Whitbill area. Kind of did that, but also kind of in the process of doing that, I discovered how to make this, which might not look like much, but this tiny little snappable stuff is made out of the lignin that you would find in wheat. And I made this because as I was researching making sculptures out of farm waste, I discovered that farm waste has fundamentally changed over the last 20 years and is mostly plastic, and that in the soils in the woodland out here and the soils in the farms out here, we were finding microplastic. And so if I was going to make sculptures out of the farm waste that I was finding, which was mostly freight strap like this, so I did start, I gave it a go. I started, this is a peregrine falcon, made out of farm waste. I would be putting waste back into the biosphere that was damaging it. Didn't really want to do that. The other thing that I found is that with those types of plastics, and I'll grab this little guy. So this was, I was making a smaller scale model or a maquette out of like a PET, which is what IBC containers are generally made out of. So they're a meter by a meter by a meter cubed, and they usually hold glyphosate and fertilizer. And because farms have gotten so huge in scale now, instead of carrying fertilizer in the smaller drums that we used to, you now get it in really big containers. And that was most of the waste that I was seeing, was these massive containers. So I was trying to figure out if I could actually make sculptures out of those massive containers. Turns out you can, but what it also turns out is if you leave them in the sun for a period of time, you can actually scratch your fingernail across them and they will shed plastic. And it was the same with the freight strap. If I left it out in the sun, any part of it that I had cut, any part of it that I had joined with heat would shed. Meaning every single piece I was going to make out of farm waste was going to do damage to the environment. Once it became clear that I really couldn't make it out of plastic waste, I realized that it was going to have to be made out of biomass. When I started surveying the woodland, I started surveying those grass stratas to look for rubbish, and as I was looking for rubbish and that kind of thing, I noticed more and more the invasive grass species that had come off the farm, so your ryegrasses, your wheat and that. And so I thought, well, that's what I'm going to make the sculptures out of. And so that became a very intensive research period in how do you actually break down biomass to make bioplastic, and what is bioplastic effectively. And why don't we use bioplastic for most things? Well, you don't use bioplastic for a lot of stuff because it's not stable like other plastic. Other plastic is made out of your forever chemicals that are gonna last forever and are very strong. Bioplastic is not. It can be starch-based, it can be gelatin-based, but it's not gonna last forever, so it's great. It biodegrades. We love that. We should see more of that. The problem is that it makes it less stable. It can also be a little bit more permeable to things like oxygen, and so a lot of places aren't going to choose it. And then this is another great one that I found during my research, is that they did actually make a biodegradable chip bag in America, but the feel of it was so uncomfortable to consumers that they then stopped making it. You should look it up. It was Sun Chips, and they made a compostable chip bag. In doing all of that research, it made it really clear to me that I needed to change my practice as an artist. So I'm a multidisciplinary. I do everything from sculpture to painting to the teaching to drama and puppetry. But a lot of that time I'm also doing set building and I'm making stuff. And that stuff is inevitably thrown away because the arts industry is incredibly wasteful. In fact, when I'm making sculptures, a lot of the time I'm making molds out of things like silicone, and those molds will get used like a couple of times to make a few versions of something, and then once the project's done, they just get shredded and thrown away. I try to reuse them in my own process where I'll take old molds and shred them down to use that as fill in my silicone molds, but at the end of the day, I'm making these structures that will last forever. To make structures that will last forever, the reality is that they're not lasting forever in a whole good way. They are breaking down. Fiberglass sculpture is becoming a little bit more of the product of the public arts world because it's cheap, because it's rapid, because we can CNC print stuff or CNC route stuff out of foam and cast it, and it's generally light and movable, which is everything that you want in public art. You know, it's expensive to try to make huge stuff out of bronze. It's expensive to try to make huge stuff out of iron ore. So a lot of stuff does get made out of these plastics that do over time break down. And we paint them and we seal them and we put a UV stabilizer on them, but at the end of the day, they do break down and they do shed plastics into the soil. Should we give a shit about that? Absolutely, because we already know that microplastics have crossed the blood-brain barrier in people. We know that they're within our endocrine system and they're endocrine disruptors. We probably, as artists, if we know it's a problem and we have the opportunity to figure out a different path, then maybe we should take that time to figure out a different path. So I thought, well, here we go. This is an opportunity to figure out a different path. So I started working with biomass, specifically ryegrass, wheatgrass, and barley grass. And what I wanted to do was figure out what it was that made those structures themselves so stable and so fantastic, because I don't know if you've ever had ryegrass in your yard. That stuff, that'll last forever. Like, it's just there until you burn it. It's got really shallow roots, which is great. Makes harvesting it really easy, which is just me wandering around in the bushlands just yanking it out and putting it into a backpack. Very shallow roots. I'm not going to rip up the native grass. That would be sacrilegious. What I figured is that you could break the biomass down into its component parts and then basically reorganize those component parts in different ways. And that's effectively what bioplastic is we take a biomass of some kind, whether that's algae, whether that's seaweed, whether that's wheat in this case, whether it's like starch from corn, and we reorganize it in a different way so that we can reuse it. Most bioplastics are made as films because they work really well in that way. It's really hard to make large chunks of it because making a chemical reaction happen generally with bioplastics, you're then going to end up with the same problem as you do with regular plastics where they don't break down. So making sculptures that were designed to break down over time, especially if they're public art sculptures, is a bit of a swing because in your career you're supposed to make art that has a legacy. So I was like, okay, what if I have the opportunity to create legacy now as an artist and revolutionize the way that I make sculpture and make it out of bioplastic and make sculptures that break down over time but don't see that as a flaw and see that as a positive. So that's when I started to invite young people from the community on board and sort of explain to them what the woodlands were, what we were kind of dealing with, why these spaces were important, why they weren't seeing any as young people. Because again, more than 80% of these eucalyptus woodlands have been wiped out and replaced with farmland. So to these young people, this has always been a grassy belt. It's always been the wheat belt. So I started working with a school about 70 kilometers inland from here who were actually close to a really beautiful remnant stand of eucalyptus woodland. And we decided that we were going to make these sculptures out of bioplastic, but we were going to use the fact that they broke down to basically have the sculptures act as the transporter species that used to exist in the woodland itself. And so transporter species, like your birds and your mammals in the woodlands, would generally transport seeds via their poop or via their fur. And they would travel large distances through the woodlands and they would spread species around. And because they would often transport it in their poop, that meant that they were traveling nutrients out to sites where new things were going to grow. So the seed was encased in poop, which meant that as the poop broke down and spread nutrients into the soil, the seed was going to grow. Dope. It's a perfect system. It's a closed loop, no waste system. And so we decided, what if our sculptures did the same thing? So what if the sculptures that we made, as they broke down, put nutrients into the soil and also were encased with seeds? So the death of the sculpture would start the life cycle again and create plants. Plants that were missing. Acacias and grasses. Genius. Genius concept. This is why you work with young people. They expand stuff in beautiful ways. So we got the young people to make sculptures of transporter species. Now these kids were aged between 8 and 11. It's their first time ever sculpting. They don't have consistent art classes at school and they don't have a consistent art teacher at school. And so came in and taught them how to sculpt, and they made, so this is a little, this is a woylie. If you've never seen a woylie before, this is kind of what they look like, just a little marsupial. And we cast their pieces in plaster. And the reason why I cast their pieces in plaster is because everything I was reading about bioplastics is that they would make a film, and that meant that they needed like very rapid evaporation for them to set up well. Plaster, if you've never worked with it before, it will suck water out of anything. And so by making plaster pieces like this, it meant that I could basically then create a film of bioplastic and place it over the plaster. The plaster would suck the moisture out and encourage the plastic to coalesce, and then create a sculpture that I would basically pull off these pieces. The first few experiments went relatively well, and we ended up with pieces like this. So this is a little goanna based on a student's sculpture. And as you can see, it's a fully, sounds like plastic, functions like plastic piece. This is made out of charcoal, starch, and lignin, all from wheat. The charcoal was from burnt wheat, because that's how we actually deal with wheat over time, is we burn the stubble. Then the starch came from low protein grain, so you want to grow wheat that has a relative protein profile for it to be paid for quite well. So high protein wheat usually goes into your alcohol industry or into your baking industry. Your lower grades go to like feed and seed. And so we chose a lower protein grade wheat that may have otherwise been wasted. And then we just chose the stalks of wheat. Broke everything up into its component parts using ethanol, using a soda bath, using hydrogen peroxide. I did this all in my kitchen, not in a lab. So basically destroyed my kitchen doing this and figured how to make this. And what we found with this plastic, this particular form, is that we could pour it into molds. So we could create molds like this that students could pour their work into. And then 3 to 4 days later, peel a piece out of the mold. But what we noticed is that it was quite fragile. So if we didn't get a good amount of film in the mold, it was very easy for us to break the pieces apart. Now that's okay, we do want them to break apart over 12 months so that the general public can see them over 12 months and have that conversation of like, oh, these sculptures, they're made out of this weird stuff. Oh, it's all made out of wheat. Oh, that's crazy. Oh, they seed landscape. Oh, that really does make me think about how delicate and fragile these spaces are. But we just wanted something that had a little bit more robustness than this. So went back to the drawing board and was like, okay, what is it that stops plants from breaking and falling apart in the sun? And I've literally just forgotten the name of it. Cellulose. Oh my gosh. My brain just died. Cellulose, fiber. We needed fiber structures. And so put this style of plastic aside and started working with more fibrous stuff. And so this contains a lot of cellulose. Difficult to see. I have to do like I'm a makeup artist. And we could make actual little structures from it, like this, which was very exciting. So this little tough nugget is cellulose, starch, and I don't think this contains lignin. So it's not delicate, it's robust. And I was like, ooh, this is the stuff. Then what we needed to do is we needed to do breakdown tests. Would these actually break down over time? So that meant I have to move 65 different sculptures. You guys are getting the worst view of my workshop, by the way, which is just like the couch in the background. But honestly, it's so dirty in here from making stuff. So this piece sat in what we call active compost for 30 days. And as you can see, it started to break down. This is high cellulose. It's gray because again, we've tinted it with charcoal. If we leave them the regular color that they come out without tinting them with charcoal, they're sort of a sickly pale yellow, and it's not very appealing, but we found that tinting them with charcoal and getting them this kind of grey, one, made them stand out in the environment, and two, is a little bit more appealing than something that looks like it's just like off milk. So they break down. As you can see, it also starts to pit and fall apart. And so this was 30 days in hot active compost, which means the compost was wet, the compost was warm, and the compost had worms and other active creatures in it helping to break this down. So looked at that and went, oh yes, okay, it will break down and it is still relatively robust. So that's what we decided that we would go with. And then it became about scaling it up. How could we make batches and batches of this and scale it to sculptures that were this size and larger? And basically, what that looked like was me harvesting as much ryegrass as I possibly could from the eucalyptus woodland. Thank God it is such a prolific species. And destroying my kitchen for about a month until I had a really stable formula of this. And I'll show you a little bit about making that now. Let's go make some bioplastic on a completely different day. I strain it. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to take some starch and protein that I've been fermenting. It's quite gross. After some time of being processed and moving out some excess moisture, as you can see, you get a pretty cohesive little doobie. So I now have a little relatively flat pancake, which I'm just going to flip into my hands and hopefully he'll come off. Look at that, he did. And now I dress him. Okay, you're back. I need to show you a finished piece though. Hang on. And this is what a finished piece looks like, made out of bioplastic. And as you can see, it's firm, it's strong, it's holding its shape, and you can see the seeds in it as well. So this piece will break down over a period of 12 months and it will seed grasses back into the soil. And they would be grasses that this species itself would eat and transport, which is kind of amazing. I'm so glad that this project failed the way that it failed at the start to end up with something like this, because now for the rest of my career I really want to focus on trying to make pieces out of stuff that it's not about the legacy of me as an artist, where it's like, oh, I have this sculpture that's lasted 100 years, but if this sculpture itself can plant 100 grass plants in the area that it is in, that's gonna live well beyond my artistic legacy. And that I care about so much more than anything else. So answering the question of how has this like elevated my career as an artist, mate, this has elevated the space that I live in, and I care about that way more than my career as an artist. I do have the opportunity to go down to the southwest and work in the Ludlow Chewett forests, and we're going to try and do the same thing with the invasive arum lily species and also with agar-agar from seaweed, which washes up on the shores of the southwest quite regularly and is a bit of a problem down there. So taking this process now and moving it to a different space. I can't wait to see the trees and grasses that these sculptures grow in the next 12 months, and I'm really excited to have partnered with Water and Wildlife Sanctuary, which is where these sculptures will go, and plant seeds so that the species that are there in that sanctuary, who are the transporter species missing from the rest of the woodland, will hopefully have more amazing stuff to eat. So thank you so much, Minderoo, for helping me do such a crazy weird project. It was so fantastic to do, and that $25,000 let me be fearless about changing my mind, and as an artist to have that flexibility to let go of one concept and find something else new, and then end up with something as cool as this, where we had young people working on the project and getting to learn about art making and everything like that, and for them to come up with amazing pieces and amazing solutions that are hopefully going to change the landscape that they grow up in. Like, it's been an awesome thing. I'm sorry I couldn't come in and show you these pieces in person so you could like touch them and smell them and feel them, because I think that is kind of part of it. it's pretty cool, but I hope that by watching this you got to understand a little bit of what you guys backed. Anyway, thanks so much. Naturally they've stopped cutting the trees now that I've finished. Oh, it's been a long day. All right, I'm gonna go harvest some more grass. Keep well, and hopefully I see some of you around the place. Come out to the wheat belt, it is pretty fun. Bye.